These are 10 more things you must know before the NBA playoffs begin. Starting off with whether or not the Golden State Warriors are overconfident in their newfound ability. Since acquiring Jimmy Butler, the Golden State Warriors have looked like a completely different team, and the numbers back it up. Before the trade deadline, things weren't exactly clicking in the Bay. They were stuck in the middle of the pack, 10th in defensive rating, 18th in offensive rating, and 16th in net rating. Nothing special. But since Butler arrived, a 6-1 record with a massive statistical leap. Over that stretch, they've jumped to 6th in offensive rating, 3rd in defensive rating, and 5th in net rating. It's a transformation that's incredibly difficult to ignore. Draymond Green certainly isn't ignoring it. Even before the hot streak, he didn't hesitate to make a bold declaration on live TV.
He's brought back that belief, and I think we're going to win the championship.
Say that one more time so that everybody here can
say that with your chest. I'm sorry. I said I think we're going to win a championship, but I lied. We are going to win the championship.
Wow.
He guaranteed the Warriors are going to win the championship this season. Not we have a shot or we believe in ourselves, a full-fledged guarantee. And while that confidence might seem a little extreme, given the fact they've only played 7 games with Jimmy Butler, the numbers suggest he might not be crazy. Historically, true title contenders rank in the top 10 for both offense and defense, giving them the versatility to match up with anyone. Right now, the Warriors are knocking on the door of top 5 in both. The only other teams in the NBA who can say the same, the Boston Celtics and the OKC Thunder. When I made my top 10 title contenders video, those 2 teams were my number 1 and 2 picks. And now, the Warriors may be forcing their way into that conversation. But beyond just the stats, the biggest reason for optimism is how well Jimmy Butler fits within the team, especially next to Steph Curry. For the first time in what feels like forever, the Warriors are holding their own when Curry has to go to the bench. Since Jimmy's arrival, they're a plus 30 in the non-Curry minutes, and before that, it was a brutal minus 90 over the first 51 games of the season. That kind of a swing is the difference between a playoff hopeful and a legitimate title contender. So are the Warriors overconfident? The team was barely in the playoff picture just a few weeks ago, and now we're talking about them winning it all. But here's the thing, you can't exactly tell them they're wrong. The franchise has reached the mountaintop a total of 4 times in the Curry era. If anyone knows what a championship team looks like and feels like, it's these guys. The only question left is whether or not they have enough time to put it all together before the grueling playoff run begins. The second thing you must know before the NBA playoffs begin is whether or not the Lakers are legitimate title contenders also. Pairing Luka Doncic with LeBron James was always going to work offensively. 2 of the smartest and most skilled players on that side of the ball in the NBA. Defense, that was the real question. So far, they've answered that call in the biggest way possible. Since acquiring Luka, the Lakers have gone 6-2, averaging 118.4 points per game, 10th in the NBA, while shooting 49% from the field, 4th in the league. Those numbers are elite offensively, but what's really surprising is just how dominant they've been defensively. Over that same stretch, they've held opponents to just 43% shooting, the best mark in the NBA, and are outscoring teams by 9.4 points per game, ranking 6th in that span. This newfound defensive brilliance was put on full display against Denver. The Lakers didn't just beat the Nuggets, they walked into their building and blew them out by 23 points, snapping the Nuggets' 9-game winning streak. And more impressively, they shut down Nikola Jokic like no other team has been able to do. So is this level of defense sustainable? That's the big question. Personally, I lean toward probably not, at least not at this level. The Lakers still lack size in the front court, and their backcourt defense isn't exactly lockdown. Luka and Austin Reeves both compete, but neither are defensive stoppers. Reeves battles hard, and he's solid against guys his size, but when he's forced to guard bigger, he struggles, as they simply just shoot over the top. Meanwhile, Luka isn't exactly known for his defensive effort, which will likely mean that Reeves is going to have to take on even tougher matchups. That said, I do believe the Lakers defense can hold up enough though, probably around the top 10. And that's good enough to make them a real championship contender on paper. A lot of people weren't happy with me when I left them out of my top 10 title contenders video, and at the time I had them 11th. But after this dominant win over Denver, and how much chemistry LeBron and Luka already appear to have, they definitely crack my top 10 now. And if they keep playing at this level, they're just going to keep climbing. The third thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs begin is what's going on in Detroit. Just a season removed from being one of the worst teams in professional sporting history, the Pistons have completely turned things around. A few key changes made all the difference. More floor spacing around Cade Cunningham and a new coach. The results, night and day. Right now, they're on a 7-game winning streak, having won 8 out of their last 10, and they sit 6th in the East, just 1 game back of the 4-seeded Indiana Pacers. Even though their offensive rating at 14th and their defensive rating at 11th aren't elite, it hasn't mattered because Cade Cunningham has been flat out brilliant. Rightfully named an all-star, Cade has transformed into one of the league's top guards, averaging 25.8 points, 9.5 assists, and 6.3 rebounds per game on 56% true shooting. He's been the engine driving this resurgence. And in fact, if you look deeply into the numbers, this single season turnaround ranks as one of the highest in the history of the NBA, alongside the Suns when they added Steve Nash, the Celtics when they added Larry Bird, and the Spurs when they added Tim Duncan. That's how well Cade has played this season. If you look closer into their 7-game winning streak, the first 6 games weren't exactly against top-tier competition. They beat the Sixers, Hornets, Bulls twice, Spurs, and Hawks, but their 7th win was the one that turned heads. They took down the Los Angeles Clippers, a playoff team from the Western Conference, and they did it with their defense led by Asar Thompson and a huge offensive performance from Cade Cunningham, putting up 33 points, 9 rebounds, 7 assists, and 3 steals in a 9-point win. But the question on everyone's minds is just how far can the Pistons go this season? For me, it's tough to see them making it out of the first round, but it's certainly not impossible. That being said, I wouldn't bet on it. What's more important is that the Pistons are finally trending in the right direction. Regardless of how this season ends, the Pistons are one of the best feel-good stories in the NBA right now, and this is likely just the beginning. The fourth thing you need to know before the playoffs begin is whether or not anybody can beat the Boston Celtics when they're rolling. Championship teams often deal with post-title hangovers, and while the Celtics hit a bit of a rough patch in the middle of the season, they've found their groove once again, and it's showing in the numbers. Over their last 10, they've been lights out from deep, leading the league in threes per game at 18.3, while shooting 39.4% from deep, the second best mark in the NBA. They've also been incredibly disciplined with the ball, averaging just 11.6 turnovers per game. On the defensive end, they're controlling the glass better than anyone, leading the league in defensive rebound percentage at 76%, while also shutting down the paint, allowing just 42.1 points per game inside, the second fewest in the NBA. This recent stretch highlights exactly why Boston is so hard to beat. They're raining threes at an elite clip, taking care of the ball, and suffocating opponents with their defense. This team really has zero weaknesses, especially when they're locked in, which then brings up the biggest question of all. Who can actually take them down in a playoff series? Honestly, I don't know if there's a clear answer. In my contender rankings video, I had the Celtics at number 1, and if anything, their dominance over the last 10 has cemented them even further as my title favorites. But what do you guys think? Is there a team that could knock off the Celtics in a 7-game series? And if so, comment below who you think has the best chance. The fifth thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs begin is just how far the Bucks can go with their new adjustments. We've talked about how they've completely flipped the switch on their play style after the trade deadline, and it's been paying off. The goal was clear: play faster without sacrificing defense, and to make that happen, they brought in younger, more athletic pieces who can defend at a high level. Since then, they've looked sharper, more energetic, and more resilient. At the time of making this video, they've won 4 out of their last 5 games, with their only loss being a tight 3-point battle against the Rockets on the road. But it's not just the wins, it's how they're winning. This team has shown legitimate fight, especially in the clutch. The Bucks started this stretch by taking down the Minnesota Timberwolves on the road without Giannis or Dame, and in the next 3 games, they pulled off multiple comeback wins. That's the biggest difference with the younger squad. They can log more minutes and never seem to run out of gas. Their fourth quarter numbers over these games back that up too. They rank 4th in fourth quarter points at 31, 2nd in turnover percentage at 9.2%, 5th in defensive rating at 102.1, and 4th in net rating at 24.5. All clutch wins. That defensive improvement is real, but their loss to Houston exposed the concern. They struggled to generate offense when it mattered the most. So just how far can the team go? Inside the Bucks locker room, there's zero doubt that they're in championship or bust mode, even though the national media narrative certainly doesn't agree. They believe that when they're playing their best on both ends, they have the chance to beat anybody. And personally, I agree. But that's the issue with this team. That rarely happens. So only time will tell if they're able to put it together when it matters the most. The 6th thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs begin is why the Knicks defense isn't good enough against title contenders. As the playoffs approach, one glaring issue stands out for New York. Their defense isn't holding up against elite teams. After yet another ugly loss to one of the NBA's top contenders, their record against Boston, Cleveland, and Oklahoma City now sits at a brutal 0-7. That's a serious concern, especially when 2 of those teams, the Celtics and the Cavaliers, are their biggest roadblocks in the Eastern Conference. At the core of this issue is their inability to defend pick and roll, and the majority of that falls on Karl Anthony Towns. Contending teams know it, and they exploit him relentlessly. Cat simply isn't quick enough laterally to contain ball handlers at the level, and if he sits back, it's an automatic triple for whoever's running the action. Against a team like the Celtics, who have Kristaps Porzingis as a pick and pop threat, it becomes a nightmare scenario. With Tatum handling the ball, he's able to exploit Cat's positioning, and with Kristaps popping out for a 3, that's open all day as well, allowing the Celtics to continue to launch high percentage 3s all game long. It's not just about Cat getting burned on switches, it's also about just how easy it is for elite teams to generate high quality looks against this scheme. Right now, the Knicks are giving up way too many open shots, as they're the worst team in the NBA at defending the 3-point line. And the top teams are smart enough and skilled enough to punish them every single time. So what's the solution? If the Knicks want to be taken seriously as a true title contender, they have to adjust their defensive coverages to protect Cat. Whether that means playing more zone, sending double teams earlier, or adjusting their rotations to keep him off an island, something has to be done. There is hope though. Mitchell Robinson's return is looming, and he could provide them with some much needed help. Coach Tom Thibodeau has already confirmed that Mitchell Robinson will reclaim his starting center role, saying in an interview that they've played the whole season without their quote-unquote starting center. But if Robinson's return isn't enough to fix their defensive holes, the Knicks' playoff run could last shorter than they hope. The 7th thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs start is whether the Minnesota Timberwolves can actually put it all together. This team is a complete roller coaster. One moment their suffocating defense makes them look like legitimate title contenders, and the next, their offense looks like something out of a G League playbook, full of stagnant isolation sets. Their latest performance though was nothing short of wild. Down 22 points on the road against OKC, without Rudy Gobert or Julius Randle, and with Anthony Edwards sitting for most of the quarter, Minnesota somehow pulled off the comeback. The spark forcing overtime and winning the game from there. The spark came from their young guys, Terrence Shannon Jr., Jalen Clark, and Rob Dillingham. Shannon Jr. and Clark brought the defensive intensity and energy that completely flipped the game, while Rob Dillingham was super solid with the ball in his hands. On the second night of a back-to-back, they outscored the OKC Thunder 41-19 in the fourth quarter and managed to force overtime in what only can be described as a defensive avalanche. With Minnesota play with this kind of effort and start knocking down some shots, They genuinely look like they could beat anybody. But the problem is their offense has proven time and time again that they're unreliable. They don't have a consistent go-to system when the game slows down, and they lean too heavily on isolation play, making them vulnerable against well-structured defenses. If Minnesota wants to be a serious contender, they have to develop a handful of efficient go-to plays that they can go to when a game gets tight. Because as exciting as their highs are, their offensive inconsistency is what could ultimately hold them back. The 8th thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs begin is whether or not this is the end of Joel Embiid's career. As unfortunate as it is, injuries have never left this man alone, and at this point, he barely looks like he can get up and down the court, let alone be a number one option on a championship team. The amount of surgeries and rehab Embiid has had to go through over the past 8 years is staggering, and it's leading some to believe that he could retire early due to these injuries. His current knee issue is simply not improving despite all the injections and special treatments. Reports suggest nothing has made a difference. Embiid himself has even admitted that he's likely going to need another off-season knee surgery. Being in and out of rehab, sometimes unable to even walk, isn't a basketball issue. It's a quality of life issue. We've seen this story before with big men, especially ones as heavily built as Embiid. Lower leg injuries have ended careers before, and the comparison to Yao Ming is becoming harder to ignore. Some have suggested that Embiid should undergo the same meniscus transplant surgery that Lonzo Ball had, but that's practically impossible for two major reasons. First, it requires a donor, and considering how rare 7-footers are, finding a suitable match would be incredibly difficult. And second, the recovery time is brutal. Lonzo Ball missed 2 full seasons, and even now he's not close to 100% of the same player he was before the surgery. So if Embiid were to undergo the same procedure at 30, he likely wouldn't return until he's at least 32, and likely later. At this point, it just might be too little, too late for Joel Embiid. It's heartbreaking that we never got to see an extended prime of Embiid dominating the NBA, and now it really makes you wonder what the future would hold for him. Will he ever be the same again? Will he even keep playing? Only time will tell. The 9th thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs start is how much better the San Antonio Spurs might be next season. This upcoming draft is absolutely loaded with talent, and the Spurs are sitting on 2 very valuable first-round picks. The first is their own, which has only become more valuable now that Victor Wembanyama is out for the remainder of the season. And the second is an unprotected first-round pick from Atlanta, and with the Hawks currently sitting around the 8th seed in the East, that pick could end up being a real asset as well. With 2 shots at landing a top-tier prospect like Cooper Flagg, the Spurs are in a prime position to add another future star. But even if they don't get Flagg, these 2 picks could still bring in high-level talent to build around Wemby for the future. In a way, Wemby's injury might be a blessing in disguise, especially since the reports suggest that the blood clots in his right shoulder were caught early and aren't expected to be serious. The situation is actually eerily similar to what happened to San Antonio in the 90s, when David Robinson had to miss most of a season, which then allowed the Spurs to land the first overall pick and draft Tim Duncan. The difference this time, they already have their Tim Duncan in Wemby, and now they have the opportunity to add another elite talent to pair with him and De'Aaron Fox. It sure is an exciting time to be a fan of the San Antonio Spurs, and the big question is just how much better are they going to be next season? The 10th thing you need to know before the NBA playoffs begin is whether or not the Rockets' offensive system is going to be able to give them enough to win a playoff series. As the playoffs approach, one big question looms over the Houston Rockets. Can their offense give them enough firepower to win a series? There's no doubt that Houston's defense has been the driving force behind their rise to the 5th seed in the West, a massive leap from missing the play-in tournament entirely last season. This team thrives on effort, energy, and elite young defenders like Amen Thompson and Tari Eason, appropriately nicknamed the Terror Twins, who wreak havoc on that end of the floor. The Rockets don't just defend well, they dominate the glass, leading the NBA in both defensive and offensive rebounds per game. They simply outwork teams, playing harder than anyone on any given night. But while their rebounding has been a strength, it's also been a sign of their biggest weakness, their offense. The reason why they get so many second chance opportunities is because they're missing so many shots in the first place. Their offensive rating sits at 15th in the NBA, and that's with all the extra looks they're generating. In the playoffs, when teams have time to game plan, opponents will certainly make a concerted effort to keep them off the offensive glass, and if that happens, the Rockets could be in serious trouble. That's why I have concerns about this team holding up in a playoff series. And if they can't rely on second chance points, are they going to be able to keep the scoreboard ticking over in a half-court setting? I'm not convinced, and ultimately, that's why I didn't include them in my list of the top 10 teams that can actually win the championship this season. But if you want to see the 10 teams that I do believe have a shot, you can check that breakdown out right now.